Well, it's that time of the year again. The time for ghosts, ghouls, and... Stay back. Stay back! Let the pumpkin have his day! The time to sit around the campfire with some kid who's always on his DS and hasn't yet discovered the magical properties of deodorant. While you all tell spooky stories over a feast of s'mores. Or at least it would be if anyone went out anymore. Let's be honest, you're watching me. No, it's really the time to sit around watching scary movies, playing scary games, and getting fat on sweets. And pumpkin pie, while we wait another month for that other holiday where we get fat on sweets and pumpkin pie. Oh, the beauty of the calendar. There are countless spooky series that I could cover on the spookiest of days, nights, spookiest of eves. I mean, there's Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Dead Space, Outlast, BioShock, Fatal Frame, Five Nights at Freddy's. But let's set aside these puny contenders. These worms for the king of them all. The name that single-handedly took the horror genre and brought it back from the brink of death, while simultaneously saving us from more of this. Boo! 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 Ah! Ooh! I mean, Silent Hill at the time basically had you playing Mortal Kombat. While Resident Evil had you punching rocks and starting a race war. I mean, come on, Capcom, not a single one of these enemies has a complexion I would consider above olive. I'm kidding, he's right here. See? See? With this being considered horror at the time, it was up to a small development team of 25 people by the name of Frictional Games to bring the back to horror. Please don't leave. No, this isn't to say that Frictional Games wasn't exactly unknown at the time. After all, they did have the Penumbra series, which was pretty well received, although it ain't no household name. It ain't no Silent Hill. I mean, let's be honest. This ain't no Silent Hill. They were doing pretty well with Penumbra at the time. Like I said, it had a good amount of attention, it was pretty well received, but it wasn't until they got to work on their magnum opus that the studio would achieve rockstar fame. Amnesia: The Dark Descent was released in 2010, and it came out with a bang. I mean, who could forget the early days of YouTube when what we know as big names nowadays were regarded by your mother as nothing more than annoying background noise while the family was just trying to eat. I specifically remember my mom walking in on a young me with a nerdy Korean man on the screen. She probably thought I was getting groomed through Skype. Countless videos of people getting spooked silly and running from the enemies in the dark corridors of Brennenburg Castle. Fan art, fan animation, custom stories. Some excellently terrifying, others not so much. With all that the Dark Descent brought with it, the most prominent was an active, vibrant community of hundreds of thousands of people, all brought together with one spooky game. The first game in the spookiest of series has you playing as Daniel, a young spry English chap of 20 or so years who can't seem to remember a damn thing. It turns out that this amnesia is self-induced because Daniel couldn't bear the terrors of Brennenburg Castle and had no choice but to forget all he's seen. At least that's how I always saw it. The lore-accurate statement says that he gave himself amnesia because of the paralyzing guilt he has over certain things he's done. We'll get to that in a moment. But I still like my theory better. As you venture into the castle, you realize that you might not be as alone as you once thought. It's during this time that you find little notes littered throughout the castle that help piece together what's going on. Some written by servants, others by the people who helped cultivate this nightmare, and some by Daniel himself. By collecting the notes your past self had written, you discovered that this all started on an expedition to Algeria. It was during this expedition that Daniel found himself trapped in an ancient tomb, with no light save for a mysterious orb. After being freed from the tomb, Daniel was immediately sent back home, where he later learned that all save one of the men from the expedition mysteriously disappeared without a trace, and the sole survivor only rambled on about how they were attacked by something terrible. Still in possession of the orb, although now in pieces, Daniel became obsessed with repairing it, although the pieces seemed to shift and change forms, making reassembly impossible. Through his efforts, it seemed that everyone whom he had come in contact with regarding the orb had mysteriously been found dead soon after. Everyone, that is, until he came in contact with Alexander von Brennenburg. A Prussian baron who sent Daniel an invitation and somehow understood his situation more than anyone should. Our protagonist would have liked to at least consider this offer until he realized he was being hunted by a mysterious shadow that had been on his tail ever since the expedition. With no other choice, Daniel was forced to accept the invitation and made his way to Alexander's castle. Things were fine for a time. Alexander actually managed to stave off the shadow for a bit. They hung out, had tea, lunch, brunch, breakfast, second breakfast. That is, until Alexander steadily groomed Daniel, who was still under threat of the shadow, to help him in the torture of prisoners in order to extract this thing called vitae. The torture would be so brutal that the two would even feed their prisoners an amnesia potion, so that every session would be as horrifying as the first, maximizing agony and maximizing vitae. To make this seem at least bearable, Alexander had told Daniel that the prisoners were all terrible criminals who deserved it. Although, it is heavily implied that most, if not all, the prisoners were just regular citizens that the Baron had kidnapped. In one specific instance of the Zimmerman family, we're shown how far Daniel's morals had descended by both the fear of the shadow and of the being desensitized of inflicting harm on others. The Zimmerman family were simple dairy farmers that had been captured just as many others, but luckily they had the chance to escape. The mother, Agath, had managed to chip away at the very stone and carve a tunnel that the youngest daughter, Elise, managed to try and escape through. Fearing that their terrible deeds would be uncovered, Daniel interrogated and murdered Agath, and later managed to track down and do the same to Elise. Poor baby. It was this event that had caused Daniel to realize the error in his ways and renounce Alexander and all the torment he had caused. It was also this event that caused Daniel to be so wrought with guilt that his only escape would be to induce amnesia upon himself, to try and forget, leaving himself a note containing the goal of venturing into the deepest sanctum of the castle, finding Alexander and killing him.
Redeem us both, Daniel. Descend into the darkness where Alexander waits and murder him. Your former self, Daniel.
As well as the reminder that he is being hunted by a living nightmare.
A shadow is following you. It's a living nightmare, breaking down reality.
Back in present day, Daniel continues to slowly make his way deeper and deeper into Brennenburg, wielding only a lantern and in intense fear of the dark. Soon enough, Daniel realizes that the shadow isn't the only thing hunting him, as he discovers these malformed, contorted, grotesque...
Oh, come on, man.
I'm sorry, I mean, look at you.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Grotesque things that wander the castle. Managing to evade these grunts, Daniel goes deeper still through the cellars, through the laboratory, through that infamous water level that still gives me nightmares, until you get to the prison. It's here that Daniel has these flashbacks of what he did to the Zimmerman family, and is even forced to escape an enemy through the same tunnel she did, as if to torment him further. Another notable level is the sewers. This is actually my favorite part of the game because this whole time you've been relentlessly chased by this servant grunt with no way to fight back. At this point, you know that these things are bad news. You know the power they have, being able to break doors, barrels, and anything else in their way. These things are your biggest nightmare. That is, until the sewers, where you happen upon the corpse of your tormentor. Then you realize the things you've been running from are grunts. Grunts! Whatever killed this must be much, much worse. Then immediately you come face to face with your new nightmare for the rest of the game, the brute. The grunt is nothing anymore. At this point you hope to see a grunt, and your worst fears are realized as the brute is able to kill Daniel in a single hit. Those laudanum you've been saving up? Useless. Also important to note is that these are not only faster than the grunts, they're faster than Daniel. Up to this point, the enemies you've been running from are either slightly slower than Daniel, or just as fast. There's also some speculation that the enemies can get a burst of speed every now and then, but that's unconfirmed. What isn't unconfirmed is that the brutes can and will catch up to Daniel. What's worse still is that you're no longer dealing with tight corridors and right angles, where you can easily break line of sight with the monsters, but now big open areas where if you're caught, you're as good as dead. It's around this time that you meet the only friendly NPC in the game, Agrippa. Agrippa was basically a proto-Daniel, a great scientist whom Alexander trusted with his deepest and darkest secrets. That is until Alexander locked his soul away in this decrepit, wasting body so that he wouldn't die of old age. This game is dark. The Agrippa side quest consists of Daniel collecting ingredients to brew the Weir's tonic. a potion designed by Agrippa's apprentice, Johann Weyer, to free his master from that bodily imprisonment. As Daniel finally nears the end of the game, it's revealed that Alexander is absolutely not human, and comes from another world, which he wishes to go back to by use of the orb in some sort of ritual. After some time, Daniel ends up finding the broken pieces of the orb, and after mending them, makes his way to the final confrontation with Alexander. It's in the inner sanctum that we finally meet Alexander in the flesh, as he goes on and on about finally being able to return home. From here, Daniel has 3 ending choices he can make. He either 1. Takes revenge on Alexander and ruins the ritual, after which the Shadow finally catches up but decides to spare Daniel, as he has finally atoned for his misdeeds, and instead devours Alexander. Or 2, he allows the ritual to succeed in opening a portal, but throws Agrippa's head in, after freeing him of course, before Alexander has a chance to use the portal. This causes Shadow to show up, and this time not spare Daniel, instead killing both men. But this is not the end. Daniel's spirit is left trapped in darkness, and you can hear the voice of Agrippa pleading with his apprentice, Johann Weyer, to find a way to save Daniel.
There he is. Do you see him, Weyer? He deserves so much more. Please, help him. I know you can. Don't worry, Daniel. It will be all right.
Then there's choice 3. Daniel lets the ritual take place and lets Alexander travel back to his home. This is arguably the worst ending, as it leads to the Shadow tormenting Daniel with his past, only to slowly consume him.
Please, let me go!
Absorbing Daniel's spirit into the eternal, unescapable void where he is thanked by Alexander.
Thank you, my friend. Your sacrifice won't be forgotten. You will be celebrated forever.
There was also a 4th ending earlier in the story when Daniel is captured by the grunts and imprisoned. It is here that you have the choice to find a way to escape, or listen to Alexander and let the Shadow catch up with you. If you choose the latter, then similar to choice 3, the Shadow taunts Daniel and later consumes him, with Alexander thanking him after some time. But, I mean, come on, you've made it this far, you might as well see it to the end. There was also Amnesia Justine, released later on as an add-on to the game. I won't spend too much time on this, as it's kind of a spin-off that was first created exclusively for Steam during Valve's Potato Sack Pack ARG, which was meant to promote Portal 2. There are even a couple Portal references in the add-on, with 2 secret potatoes you could collect during the time the ARG took place. Not to mention that also, like in Portal, this expansion saw a protagonist going through a series of tests with the voice egging you on in the background. The plot consisted of Justine having 3 suitors which she must evade in order to survive. Alois, Basil, and Mallow, each just as mad as the last. Alois, who is madly in love with Justine and is dangerously obsessed with being with her forever. Basil, who is obsessed with killing Justine, and Mallow, who is obsessively a cannibal. I believe Mallow had been eating himself prior to the encounter and now wishes to eat Justine as he has grown tired of his own flesh, but I don't remember all too well. Details. The ending to this short adventure depends on whether or not Justine found the secret letter in the library. The exact ending I'll leave to you to discover, just so I don't spoil absolutely everything. And so ends the first game in the spookiest series. A Machine for Pigs. Possibly the most controversial game in the series, A Machine for Pigs was released in 2013, and interestingly enough, was developed not by Frictional Games, but instead by the Chinese Room, who actually started off as a mod team for Half-Life 2. This change shows, as a machine for pigs is lacking many of the features that make the Dark Descent interesting and unique. You can no longer interact with just everything in the environment. What's up with all these locks everywhere? The character no longer has nyctophobia, so there is no real consequence for not using the lantern. You could even cheat and raise gamma to 100 if you wanted to, and nothing would change. And while we're talking about the lantern, they gave it infinite oil. Remember how stressful the first game was? Maybe you're using the lantern too much and wasting all your oil? Yeah, no need to worry about that anymore. This is just a horror game after all. Not to mention, they turned it into an absolute spotlight. In the sequel to the greatest horror game of all time, they decided to give you a spotlight with infinite use. What makes things worse is that it even flickers when enemies are nearby, so you're not really surprised anymore. Needless to say, I obviously don't like this game very much. I guess it's fine for a horror game. It's more like those walking simulator horror games you see nowadays. But compared to Amnesia: The Dark Descent, this is not good. I want to change my mood. Let's talk about what I do like about this game. The monsters. I don't know what it is about pigs, but they're just so creepy sometimes. They can be cute. They can be nice little pets. But I remember being a little kid and watching Spirited Away when the parents turn into pigs. That terrified me. And I mean, look at them. Look at how they move, how they shuffle. Look at it. And the sounds they make. Ugh. Even if you don't find these scary, I mean, imagine seeing one of these in real life. I mean, come on. The story for this game begins with our protagonist Oswald waking up and getting a call from the mysterious voice of an entity called the Engineer, telling you that your kids are trapped in the aforementioned machine, and the only way to free them is to repair it and turn it on. Unlike The Dark Descent, in which Daniel never got his memories back and instead was only able to look back through the foggy window of his notes, Oswald progressively does remember his past, as he makes his way to the machine. Of course, while avoiding the man-pigs the whole time. When Oswald finally gets to the machine, he turns it on, and it's revealed that the voice of the Engineer lied about the whole thing. His children are not in fact trapped in the machine, but have been dead since the beginning. And the machine, it releases a whole onslaught of pigmen into the streets of London. Panic in the streets of London, and Oswald wonders if life could ever be sane again. Well, yes, it can, because they removed the sanity mechanic. Did I mention that? What was arguably the best feature from the first game is gone. Oswald goes on with his journey, this time with the goal of venturing to the machine's core and disabling it, while narrowly avoiding more piggies, of course. Eventually, Oswald recovers enough of his memories to realize that it was none other than he who created the apparatus.
Proud, but this is your doing.
Not only that, but the machine and Oswald are linked together as it was made with part of his soul. As he finally nears a sentient machine, it tries to reason with Oswald to not disable it. This is another thing the game does really well actually, is this speech that the game presents you with right at the end, right as you're nearing the end of your journey, which I will play in its entirety here because I think it's really cool.
I have stood knee-deep in mud and bone and filled my lungs with mustard gas. I have seen 2 brothers fall. I have lain with holy wars and copulated with the autumnal fallout. I have dug trenches for the refugees. I have murdered dissidents where the ground never thaws and starved the masses into faith. A child's shadow burnt into the brickwork. A house of skulls in the jungle. The innocent Manders trod and bled and gassed and starved and beaten and murdered and enslaved. This is your coming century. They will eat the Manders. They will make pigs of you all, and they will bury their snouts into your ribs, and they will eat your hearts.
Thanks for sticking around. Imagine the horror of being this machine and knowing what's to come of the world at the turn of the century. In the 30s, 40s, all the wars and turmoil, terrifying. Then, Oswald proceeds to sacrifice himself, and presumably his soul, to disable the machine and save all of London. Maybe the world? Well, London anyway. Definitely the weakest in the bunch, but being the weakest in this bunch isn't that bad of a thing. Amnesia Rebirth. Rebirth is a very interesting game. Gone are the less than stellar design choices of a machine for pigs. When this was announced, it was clear that this was going to be a return to form. And best of all, it was going to be frictional. Frictional games back at it again with another banger. Sanity, a good lantern system, tinderboxes, kinda. Well, matches anyway. Nyctophobia. This one was going to take everything that made The Dark Descent an instant classic and bring them into next-gen levels of polish. And did it deliver? Yes! I will say that this one still doesn't rank as highly as the first, but it is definitely one of the best horror games of 2020. Definitely better than Rope Simulator over here. It's even almost as good as Soma. Ooh, we haven't even talked about Soma! Maybe in a later video. Grab a snack, cause this one is long. No, I'm serious. I'll wait. Amnesia Rebirth has you assume the role of Tazi Trianon, a Frenchie on an expedition to Africa. Sounds pretty familiar. Tazi begins her journey after a crash landing that has left her with, you guessed it, amnesia. As she ventures out to find her expedition mates, especially her lover Salim, she eventually waddles into this cavern, littered with mysterious religious paraphernalia. Two important things are revealed in this cave adventure. First is that Tazi holds a traveler's amulet, a mysterious alien device that allows her to travel to an ancient alien world. Sound familiar? Second is that Tazi is currently stressing for two. Thankfully, she's still a ways off, so we don't have to worry about having a baby in the middle of this game. Things start looking up, however, when she discovers Salim. Things start looking down when he's dead. Now, Tazi only has one thing to fight for. One reason to make it out of this hell she has yet to enter, her unborn child. Tazi continues on to an abandoned French fort where she recalls that she had already been there prior to the airplane accident. This fort section of the game is absolutely terrifying. When I played this, I had such high hopes. This was the first real Amnesia game in a decade. I wanted to get scared. I wanted to soil my pantaloons. The game immediately lived up to expectations when it had Tazi sneak through the first floor of the fort, repair an elevator with the threat of something maybe lurking about. Then, once Tazi reaches the second floor, it becomes apparent that something is absolutely out to get you. As if to taunt the player themselves, you are then required to break the sound barrier by having a literal cannon crash through the floor into the radio room, your goal for this level. Requiring you to go around sneaking, trying to already solve a puzzle with a monster maybe searching for you is genius. A part of me even thinks that this might be some sort of a tutorial level in which the monster hasn't even been activated yet, but I don't know. I remember going back to check, running around, making noise and finding nothing, until I got to the entrance where I turned the corner and the creature was right there.
Ah, I knew it!
That's what I love about this. And the game making you break the cardinal rule of horror games by having you make a deafening noise during a tense moment? Mwah! After using the radio and actually making contact with someone, Dr. Metzier, Tazi is instructed to travel to a neighboring village. Thankfully, this helpful map shows us how to get there. Our way to the village path is currently blocked off, but we are able to BFG our way through the giant door and, of course, Tazi continues on through the bowels of the fort, avoiding the ghouls hunting her and encountering some sort of spirit that seems to be guiding her. After leaving the fort for good, Tazi is finally on the path to the village, of course. This time, however, she falls not into the bowels of some place, but instead is transported to the alien world. This is our first real glimpse into that world, and it is very cool. There are these energy puzzles where you're required to connect a stream through these prisms in order to activate doors and whatnot. And this great moment where you step outside for a bit and it finally dawns on you the scale of this world. This is like something straight out of Tormentum. We also come in contact with an orb. Remember the orbs? Let's put our listening ears on for the orbs, friends. They're important. Speaking of which, messing around with the orb causes something to scream out for Tazi. As she returns to Earth, Tazi notices that somehow her baby bump is looking more like a baby dump. Dumpy. She's grown is what I'm saying. Perhaps there is some issue with time when traveling between worlds. Now, into her third trimester, it's a race against time as Tazi must make her way out of the crypts while being pursued by ghouls and some sort of shadow. Seem familiar? In her quest to power up the orb and create a portal to the village, Tazi has a run-in with a familiar-looking ghoul in a maze-like room of streets and alleys. This part is stressful. especially since you never know exactly what you're doing. After finally getting through the room, Tazi reflects on Leon, a member of her expedition whose fate led to the monster she just narrowly avoided. Too narrowly, it seems, as she has another run-in with it, torturing yet another expedition member, Richard. No good deed goes unpunished, however, as Richard wastes no time in trying to cripple Tazi to the point where she could act as a distraction for Leon. This leads our mother-to-be to go through a transformation and murder Richard herself. She later evades Leon one last time and finally sets back on the path, or I guess portal, to the village. Unfortunately, however, the Shadow has other plans. She is once again diverted to the other world where a couple things happen. An alien x-ray machine shows that the baby is not doing so well, and is in fact suffering the same illness as Tazi's first child. Then, Tazi has the choice of curing the baby with vitae through, of course, more torture. I won't show that here, but trust me, it's very cool. It's here that a new enemy is introduced, the Wraith. And Tazi has the choice to infect the world's vitae tubes with the Shadow in order to free the prisoners of their eternal torture. Now back on Earth again, Tazi finally makes it to the village, only to discover that everyone has been killed. She is caught in a trap where another familiar ghoul actually manages to hold on to their humanity for just long enough to free Tazi. Only for her to be immediately betrayed once again as the ghoul loses herself and chases Tazi through the dunes. This girl just can't seem to catch a break as she meets up with a doctor just to be betrayed again as soon as she gives birth. The doctor takes Tazi's baby and runs away with it, presumably to give to the spirit in return for their humanity back. After some more alien shenanigans, things come to a head when Tazi confronts a spirit who really wants that baby. From here, Tazi has two choices. Either she A, decides to infect the world's vitae supply with the Shadow, causing the whole tower to collapse, killing all three of them, but also finally ending the suffering of thousands. Or B, she takes her baby in an attempt to escape the nightmare, infects some of the vitae with the Shadow, and uses the orb to teleport back home. This is possibly the best ending, but it's left unclear what will happen to Tazi in the near future, as well as her baby. And let's not forget the ever-popular secret ending, where Tazi is defeated by the spirit and fully succumbs to being a ghoul, and is fated to ever wander the alien world, with faint memories of the past. This game excellently took the cosmic horror of the first game and turned it up to 100, as it turns out that the Shadow is this powerful, maybe all-powerful, entity that spans worlds. There is no hiding. There is only running and cowering. This, coupled with the terror of an entire world filled with creatures doomed to an eternity of suffering for the extraction of vitae, makes this one of the bleakest universes ever explored in gaming. The ghouls were honestly nothing special concept-wise, they were just skinny humanoids that have been done 1,000 times in other games. But, they have never been done this well. It's the execution that makes them terrifying. Ever since that first encounter in the fort, you are conditioned to cry when you hear that terrible noise. There are some parts I kinda miss, where the level design is created with a loop or a hidey hole in which you know the purpose is to either kite or hide from a monster respectively. That, and the chase sequences are a bit I'm not sure how I feel about the chase sequences actually. On the one hand, it's kinda cheap throwing the main enemy of the game at you a million times. As we know, the more you're exposed to something, the more your fear for that thing dwindles. But on the other hand, I guess it's kinda cool having those "it's gonna get me" moments. I was also a little disappointed with the story. It's a fine story and it's not bad at all really, but I kept thinking in my head that as the baby was growing at an unnatural rate, and Tazi was obviously becoming more and more ghoulish in the mid to late game, she would somehow give birth to herself? Or maybe she could have a stillbirth, in which case she would create a vessel to be reborn into? It is Amnesia Rebirth after all. Although it has its faults, the highs of this game are still absolutely, astoundingly astronomical. Another notable thing is the lantern. It's the same type as in the Machine for Pigs, but it complements the environment and the creep factor by being narrow and never letting you see enough of your surroundings for you to feel safe. Not to mention it has oil. Amazing how frictional... I'm gonna move. The Bunker. It is 2023. The highs of Amnesia The Dark Descent have dwindled after 13 long years. Horror was doing well for some time, but now we're back to it being more action than horror. The Callisto Protocol was boring. Scorn was boring. The Mortuary Assistant was hey, actually that was pretty good. We are living in a post-Five Nights at Freddy's world. Even that has been played out a lot. Remake number 4 has parrying. Parrying! Apart from the odd semi-banger here and there, things are not looking good for horror. All hope is lost. Then Frictional comes out and announces the bunker. Return to form, baby. No more parrying. No more walking sims. This is by far the most terrifying piece of media I have ever seen. Everything about this game is perfect. The mechanics, the monster design, the monster's AI design, the setting, even the length. It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details. In the bunker, you once again play as a Frenchman, although this time it's an actual French man and not a French woman. Forget I ever made that joke. It is 1916. World War I is at its peak and France ain't doing too good, which of course means we're not doing too good. The game drops you in as a foot soldier by the name of Henri Clement, currently in the trenches of war where you learn how to load a gun, how to interact with the environment, and how to get cornered by the German Soldaten. It is here that we are saved by our comrade and close friend, Augustin Lambert, a selfless man who would not hesitate to give his life for his fellow soldier if need be. As we venture through the trenches, we find ourselves ambushed yet again, this time with deadly gas grenades. Thankfully, before we succumb to the gas, Lambert once again comes to our aid and tosses us a handy gas mask. What a nice friend. I swear this is the most positive the series has ever been. This bro moment is cut short, however, after the game cuts to a dangerous game of dice between Henri and Lambert, to see which poor soul will have the misfortune of patrolling for the night. For better or for worse, Lady Luck sides with us, and Lambert is the one doomed to patrol for the night. But, of course, we can't have nice things in Amnesia, and so the next scene is Lambert bleeding out in a ditch and surrounded by water? Henri immediately jumps in to feed him water, as well as to pull him out of that hole and attempt to bring the boy back home. But, of course, we can't have nice things in Amnesia, and so the cutscene ends with the pair being shelled, and Lambert looking lifelessly towards the stars. We never really get to see what happened to Lambert after this, but considering the absolute saint he is, I just hope the poor guy didn't suffer. We also get this cool screen here that tells you you're completely alone now, and the game will not be holding your hand, paying homage to the Dark Descent when the game literally told you to not play to win. After an undetermined amount of time, Henri wakes up in the sick bay of a bunker to discover he has, you know the thing. It doesn't take long to figure out that something terrible has occurred not too long ago, as there is eerily blood everywhere and yet no one around. No one, of course, but Mr. Wind-Up Louder Than a Bomb Flashlight over here. It's not until we get to the pantry that we discover what very well may be the only soul left in this place apart from Henri. It's this soldier, boyfriend, that finally sets the scene for us and reveals that a terrible beast has ravaged the inventory and caused the higher-ranking officers to flee and blow the entrance closed, trapping everyone else inside and dooming them in this hell. Boyfriend also tells us that there is only one way of escape, and that is to collect the dynamite from the arsenal, and the handle to trigger it, which is in the excavation site. Only then can Henri blow the entrance back open and finally escape. These two items are our only goal for the whole game. We are also given a side objective, which is to head into the pantry and grab some bullets, so that we can put old boyfriend out of his misery. But, well, of course, you get the idea. Now, for all we know, it is just Henri and the beast in the bunker, playing a fatal game of cat and mouse. The beast itself, by the way, is terrifying. This game follows the mechanic of having one monster that is driven by advanced AI like Alien Isolation, but in my opinion, the alien walked so the beast could run. They both behave similarly, with the enemy stalking the player and chasing at noises, but the setting, as well as how the levels are set up, works so much better here. Meanwhile in Alien, you had a silent flashlight with ample batteries and were always set in bright wide rooms, so you never really had to use it anyway. Back in the bunker, this is around the time we discover the safe room. Safe sounds cool and all until you see this damn thing show up later on in the game. This is also the location of the generator, a godsend in the bunker. With gasoline that Henri can find scattered throughout the bunker, Henri can fill up the generator and actually have some light to help him out. Not only does this help with sight and just making things less creepy overall, but there is a note you can find that reveals the monster is somewhat afraid of the light. Only somewhat though, as it may still come out in the light, just less aggressively. Soon enough, we find ourselves in the first real area of the game, the soldiers' quarters. The goal for this section is to get to the communications room and get the code for the arsenal, where the dynamite is. After turning on a series of breakers that are daisy-chained together in order to turn the radio on, we are given the door code and immediately make our way back to the safe room to gather ourselves. From there, it's a simple matter of going down to the arsenal, unlocking the door, and meeting our second threat for this game, these Chuck E. Cheese-sized pizza rats. Now, these rats are not necessarily there to kill us. Instead, they are more of a very stressful roadblock. You can just run and jump past them, but doing so will not only take some of your health, but it will also alert the monster and cause you to bleed. Bleeding is perhaps the most dangerous thing in this game, as if you don't staunch it immediately, the blood will lead the beast back to you, as well as any rats that are sick of eating dead things. To remedy this, we can do a couple things, none of which are easy. We can silently shoot the rats away with a torch, but crafting a torch takes precious gasoline. Not to mention that this is only a temporary fix, as the rats will repopulate the area after you move on, forcing you to deal with them on the way back. We can also just shoot the rats or throw a grenade or Molotov. Although this is a permanent fix, this also costs precious resources and is bound to make the beast more angry than you want it to be. After getting through the arsenal, we are greeted with the beautiful sight of the dynamite. And so we finally get the dynamite and it feels amazing. We hold one of the 2 items now needed to escape, and the relief is immeasurable. Finding the detonator, however, won't be so easy. To get to the excavation tunnels, we need bolt cutters, but to get those, we'll need a wrench. But to get that, we need a code that is located in the pillbox of the maintenance area. This is possibly the most dangerous part of the game, as it houses the chapel, which the beast has made into a bloody mess of a lair. Once we use the code to collect the wrench, we can make our way to the prison where we find another lost soul. This time a German POW that has been locked in his cell the whole time. Using the warden's controls, we can open his door and either let the monster deal with him, or shoot the monster and lock him back in, saving his life. Now, is that really better? Now, we are finally able to get to the excavation tunnels, where the setting turns from a grungy old bunker to these elegant ancient Roman tunnels. Henri is not the only one in these halls, however, as a blind madman also roams around, armed with a shotgun. This man is Toussaint Boufoy, a fellow French soldier who ventured too deep into these tunnels and became mad with what he saw. Henri can either evade or kill Boufoy in order to get the detonator for the dynamite. It's a mad dash back to the entrance as we lay down the dynamite, plop that detonator down, and, of course. In this final section of the game, we fall deep into the Roman tunnels, where we do manage to find an escape. The only issue is that between Henri and the escape stands the beast, desperate to not let him go. From here, one of 3 things can happen. 1. Henri falls into the hole where he comes face to face with the familiar glow and growl that consumes him. 2. Henri manages to evade the monster and escape the bunker, after which the monster also escapes and presumably roams the battlefield, continuing the nightmare. Things don't end too well for Henri, as the Germans and their hounds immediately rush to what must have been the noise of the dynamite, and Henri is either captured or killed. Or 3. Henri manages to not only evade the monster, but also cast it down into the abyss, where Henri meets the same fate after his escape, but this time without the monster roaming free. If the player is diligent and collects enough notes, you can piece together that not only did Henri cause Lambert's death by cheating at the game of dice, but the water he fed Lambert in the ditch was cursed, in fact being the same type of water that Tazi had to deal with in Rebirth, making Henri the cause of this entire nightmare. Apart from the main story, the bunker has so many collectibles and missable items for the player to search for. Obviously, there are many helpful and interesting notes to find as per the other games in the series, but there are also amazingly detailed photographs ranging from lighthearted pics to nightmare-inducing stills of horror. There is also a room in the game containing walls of lockers, the codes to which you have to find scattered throughout the bunker. Apart from some necessary items, you're not meant to get everything in one playthrough, as it's really easy for the player to miss codes and other fun moments when being stalked by the polar bear-sized abomination. This does a good job towards increasing replayability, especially at higher difficulties. After all, Shell-Shocked mode was released recently for Halloween of this year. There are some parts I had to gloss over in the story, but that's because this game is actually randomly generated. The levels stay pretty much the same, but most of the items, codes, as well as traps are randomized, so no 2 playthroughs will be exactly alike. Trust me, I would have liked nothing more than to spend more time actually praising this game, and seeing how short this section is breaks my heart. But unfortunately, there isn't too much to talk about here. It is unfortunately burdened with potentially having the shortest length of the 4, depending on how slow you traverse the different areas. In other words, how scared you are. When focusing on the main story alone and disregarding all side collectibles and achievements, a single playthrough for Amnesia the Bunker can range from an average of 5 to 6 hours for casual players to about 3 to 4 hours for more aggressive players. It took me 10 hours. I didn't even get half the achievements. The average completionist run for this game takes less than an hour longer than it took me. This one might even be better than the first one, and that says a lot. Secrets. Now, fair warning to anyone watching this part contains spoilers, specifically for the Dark Descent. Not story spoilers, mind you, we've already had plenty of those, but spoilers for some fun little behind the scenes things for the series. Although I'll be talking about each game, this might ruin your experience for the Dark Descent specifically. If you haven't played the Dark Descent, I strongly suggest you do before watching this, and even if you have played it, strongly consider keeping yourself in blissful ignorance, please. For the series' debut, players will doubtless have a hard and stressful time managing their sanity, especially as it's constantly slowly diminishing thanks to Daniel's nyctophobia, and absolutely tanks when you look at a monster. What the game doesn't tell you, however, is that sanity does not matter. It's just an arbitrary sprite in your inventory. Of course, Daniel starts to hallucinate sights and sounds at lower levels, but that's really it. The only real danger that comes from having low sanity is that Daniel will collapse if it gets too low, leaving him as easy prey for the monsters. However, and this knowledge might ruin the game for you, after Daniel dies, the monster stalking him despawns from the level. I'm not sure if this happens every time, but it might. This may sound cheap in concept, but in practice, it lets you try the level again with just the threat of being stalked. This goes back to what we were talking about with chases in Rebirth, because the more the player is exposed to something, the less afraid they become. So by having a terrifying monster chase end with death, the player knows that things are serious without it ever getting overplayed. This helps to avoid instances where the player becomes annoyed at dying over and over and keeps things scary. I also kinda lied before when I was talking about the speed the monsters have, but that's because of how they both act. In reality, both the Grunt and the Brute are ever so slightly faster than Daniel, but it's the Brute that is relentless. While the Grunt might give up a chase and wander around the area, the Brute is programmed to hang around where it last saw Daniel and not stop until he's dead. For all it does to murder the player, the Dark Descent actually does a surprising amount to help the player as well, as those who rely on their lanterns too often will find these barrels filled with oil that they can use for their lantern. On the other hand, players who are more frugal and carry around multiple flasks of oil will find just a few drops in these barrels. This variable difficulty is just one of the many things that made the Dark Descent so unique. A Machine for Pigs doesn't have a lot going on behind the scenes, but it did have an interesting mechanic and concept called infection. This would have replaced sanity instead of having ditched it altogether. At a light infection, players would have a slight cough with an overlay on the screen. At a moderate infection, the player would take damage every now and then while stopping to vomit, and of course the overlay would get more apparent. At a high infection, the player would barely be able to walk, and the overlay would be worse still. Then, at a lethal infection, movement would be barely possible, and the overlay would be all over the screen. This is a cool concept, and I would have preferred them adding something like this instead of just taking sanity out completely. It would need some work, however, as the way it's described would have just been annoying. Although not a hidden mechanic, in Rebirth Tazi can check on her baby bump whenever she wants, but there are specific moments where she can feel the baby kicking. If she happens to check her bump during these events, her sanity will slightly heal. Now, I would have liked it if sanity had more of a lethal effect in this game, so that it would lead to tense situations where Tazi could be running from a monster and would be forced to find a hiding place quickly and check on her baby. Unfortunately though, this never really happens, and it's really hard to miss an opportunity to heal your sanity, as the window for it is very forgiving. The monster AI for the bunker was advertised as being super advanced, and it shows here. I have a theory that the beast works on a kind of points system, where doing certain things like activating key items and making noise raise the chance for the beast emerging from its tunnels, while other things like having the generator running and staying silent lowers the point system. Now, I've tested this, and it seems like the more you hurt the monster, the higher the points tend to stay, making it kind of permanently angrier with you. It also seems like the higher the points are when the monster emerges, the more relentless it will be in its search for you. Not to mention that there are moments where you could be doing everything right and the monster comes out anyway just because it wants to. This suggests that the point system could also be random at times, just to catch you off guard. Another cool thing is that if the player searches every crevice of the bunker and discovers that the beast is in fact Lambert, they can head to its lair and pick up a rabbit toy that Lambert was planning on bringing back for his son. If the player throws the rabbit toy at the beast during a chase, it will actually stop its pursuit completely and take the rabbit plushie back to its lair, where the player can retrieve it to once again have another get out of jail free card.
I should be safe in here. I just wanted to apologize to anyone who saw this. I'll never look at Thanksgiving the same again. That's the one night of the year I don't get cheeseburgers. I get the chicken sandwich.
Is this I forgot the line. And so ends the first game of the spookiest series. Are you going? Every time. Alright.